I have two brief questions I'd like to ask, if I may.
Hi, welcome to Left Foot Media. My name is Brendan Malone and you're watching The Daily Question. Today's question of the day: is Castle Rock a glamorous fraud? Now, the reason I'm asking that question is because I have just finished watching season 1 of the TV series Castle Rock. Now, for those of you who don't know anything about this TV series, there are going to be spoilers in this video today. So if you want to watch it without spoilers, shut this off, go and watch it and then come back later. If you don't care about spoilers, then watch away. So for those who don't know about the show, Castle Rock is a show that's not written by Stephen King, but it's written by a couple of other writers who have taken Stephen King characters and settings, more settings than actual characters, and they have used them to tell a new story, their own story, which features also other original characters. Now, one thing I really love about this show is the fact that it actually has a real Stephen King kind of vibe. Whenever I've read Stephen King books, they all have a very, what I would call, for me anyway, in my imagination, they have the same type of vibe or feel to them. The way I imagine the world and the things sort of unfolding. If you like what you might call the ethereal, the spiritual tone of that world. And for me, it's fairly consistent when I read Stephen King. And I think this TV series actually captures a lot of that very effectively. It has a very King-esque sort of vibe and feel to it, and the way it's constructed and the way the visuals look and the use of music, etc. However, the question remains, is this actually legit? Is there more substance than just that, or is this a very glamorous looking fraud? So, you look at something and you go, wow, look at that beautiful gold and diamond ring. It looks so wondrous and expensive. And then you look a little bit closer and you realize, it's actually just made of brass. And that's not actually real diamonds, it's just literally glass that has been cut to look like a diamond. So the question is it a glamorous fraud, or is there some real substance going on in the show? Let me explain what I mean. By about the 50% mark, so 50% of the way through the first season, 50% of the episodes viewed, I was enjoying this. And I thought, okay, this is interesting. They're taking their time. They're building this up. There's a mystery here. What's going on? By about the 75% mark, so I'm 75% through the season, I'm now starting to go, what's actually going on here? By the end of the final episode of the season, I was like, you did what now? What was that all about? And I found myself actually frustrated at the end of that final episode. I'm not convinced this is as cohesive on the writing side as it first appears to be. This whole idea of a slow burn, and they really take their time and they're developing things in a really deep and sort of meaningful way. I'm not actually sure whether it's that cohesive or not. You've got sort of things that look quite glamorous. For example, the couple who arrive, the university professor and his wife, the adulterous wife, and they arrive in town to set up that sort of murder B&B, and then very quickly they're dead themselves. That feels like, I don't know, it just feels like an excessive and overinflated use of a plot device or a plot point to me. It sort of feels a bit pointless to do that, to sort of elevate these two characters in this way and give this implication of something profound and important happening in the plot with them, and then all of a sudden to basically discover that they are nothing more than a plot device. And I would argue a very overinflated plot device too, because effectively their role in the plot, what they actually do, you could achieve that in other, still interesting, but less overly convoluted ways. You could do it in more simple ways. It's sort of strange and you sort of wonder, is this just pretentious? Are they just doing this? I don't think it's to fill time, but it feels like maybe this is just too much of a pretentious. You've overinflated, you've done something here that you don't actually need to do here, just to try and maybe look impressive. And it's sort of, so things like that sort of started raising doubts in my mind. Also, there's a lot of questions here. The central plot of this, the whole idea of a character or a set of characters who are crossing, dimensions, and one of the characters ends up in the other dimension and vice versa. There's nothing new about that. And particularly in relation to television series, the first thing I thought of when that plot point is revealed was, I thought, Fringe. And it just sort of stuck in my mind from that point. Now, to be fair, there's enough different here so you can say this isn't just a rip-off of Fringe, but the fact that it's such a big plot point was done before, and it was done by Fringe. It does sort of keep you going back to, you think about Fringe a lot, and I don't necessarily think the writers would have wanted us to do that. I don't think that was what they were intending there. So it'll be interesting to sort of see how that actually plays out. There's lots of big questions here that haven't actually been answered, and that's why for me there's this ultimate big question hanging over the show. Is this actually any good? Because here's what I think. When you look at all the questions we've got around the show, so for example, the kid, is he the devil, or is he genuinely, like he claims, this guy who's come from another dimension and is now totally innocent, and he's being trapped here? Where do his powers come from? Where did he learn his powers? So if he is just the kid, where did he learn that he's got those powers? If he's actually the devil and that's why he has the powers, why did he remain in the hole for so long when he had the power to actually get himself out of the hole a lot earlier? Ruth, is she central to this? Because it sort of sets up the implication here that she is actually quite important, and what's going on in her mind is actually pivotal to this whole story and the way it's unfolding. But then by the end, it's not really what's going on, but still the question remains. Molly Strand, what's her deal? Why is she doing what she's doing in this? Because she's not just a sort of secondary character. She's certainly not a subplot. Her plot and her role in this story, this is an interesting thing for me. One of the things I think about Castle Rock is it sort of feels like there might be too many main characters. You've got sort of 3 or 4 characters where it's like, whose story are we following here? Who is supposed to be the main character? And obviously Henry, it's sort of through his eyes that we're following this. But it feels like some of these other characters, and this is what I was talking about before, this whole idea of excessive writing and convoluted ways of doing things, has it actually created a situation for the show where you've now got effectively too many main characters? You've fleshed out too many characters too much. And what you really want is you want your main character fleshed out in a way that sort of takes precedence, and then the other characters who are close, sort of secondary characters, you want them fleshed out enough to do their job in the plot, and then your sort of periphery characters, you just give them the enough motivation and characterization to do what they need to do. But in this one, it feels a little bit like maybe they've fleshed out too many characters too much now, and so it's a little bit confusing. Henry's son, is this a family gift? Is his son following in the family footsteps? What's going on there? There's lots of questions, basically. This series one left a lot more questions than it did answers, and I would say that the ending of the series was not particularly satisfying. To all of a sudden have that very rough cut and to have a time jump, it felt really jarring. It's like, why did they do that? Why have you left? Well, maybe they haven't left, or whether they wrote it or not, I don't know, but why has so much been left on the cutting room floor or the writing room floor that probably should have been in that gap? All of a sudden we jump to it's many months later down the track, and now we're telling the story from that point. But there's lots of interesting things that sort of, it kind of would be good to know between those 2 points. So for me, season 2 is either going to do one of 2 things. It's either going to build on what has been set up and is going to become one of the most amazing TV series ever written, because the first season, they actually allowed themselves to create because this feels like a very comprehensive backstory. Now, the thing is that could be a comprehensive backstory which starts an amazing season 2, which they build on, and all of a sudden it's like, wow, they really have created this amazing example of world building, fictional world building here. Or it could be a very over-convoluted backstory, and they've taken far too much time and set up far too many things which really they shouldn't have obsessed over so much. And now season 2 reveals that it wasn't so much about setting up some really impressive world building, it was little more than a cutesy gimmick. It's like, hey, Stephen King, remember him? You love Stephen King, and you love Shawshank, and you love Maine, and you love Castle Rock, and Sheriff Alan Pangborn. Well, guess what? Come and watch our show with Stephen King stuff in it. And so it's either going to be revealed as a really good TV show with some really impressive writing that they've actually gone old school and really taken their time, or it's going to be revealed as a cutesy gimmick. And they've done a bit of a J.J. Abrams and set up all of these things in over-convoluted ways, and now they can't actually deliver on what I guess the promise that they have set up for us. The one thing to me that I found a little bit worrying was the very end of that episode, what you might call the end credit scene, for want of a better term, and the way in which that unfolds and the link to the Overlook Hotel and The Shining. it's a little bit like, oh no, are they actually just going to repeat the same sort of thing at the Overlook? Is that what's going to happen here? They're now just going to shift attention to this new character, take her to the Overlook where she has a family relation to the events that happened in The Shining, which I thought was a clever little Easter egg to drop into the series. But are they now going to do that? And then we've seen this, we've seen Castle Rock, we've seen Maine, we're going to move on now, and we're just going to take some of these same characters with us and play out a new story? Because if they do, then this will not be a good show. This is a very over convoluted way of an overly complex and I would say pointless at times writing style and direction for a TV show that doesn't make for a very satisfying story. If it is a setup for something more to come, then I'm really interested to see what actually comes next. As per usual, I'd love to hear your thoughts, so please let me know what you think in the comments section below. And if you like the content I'm creating and you'd like to see more of it, then please support me on PayPal or Patreon. There's a link for both in the description below. That's right, I can hear my theme music too. I'll see you tomorrow on The Daily Question.